At 15, I swore I'd never be poor again. At 40, I owned 83 luxury hotels. But I didn't see the betrayal coming, not from him. When the FBI showed up at my door, I knew who set the trap. But I didn't panic. I had one last blueprint, and he'd left me all the tools.
My name is David Marin. I'm 40 years old. I haven't taken a vacation since I was 19. I built the Marin Hotel Group from a garage and a beat-up Toshiba laptop that ran hot enough to boil coffee. When other teenagers were figuring out girls or cars, I was negotiating dropship terms with Turkish bedding manufacturers. When they went to college, I slept 4 hours a night and learned enough corporate law to scare real lawyers. My first property, a crumbling beachfront in Cape May, became profitable in 18 months. Now there are 83 Marin properties in 9 countries. Luxury stays, discreet clientele, controlled margins. Success didn't surprise me. It just validated what I already knew. Work is everything. The battlefield of real men isn't physical anymore. It's in spreadsheets, in 4 a.m. decisions, in capital leverage before anyone else sees the move. I didn't build this alone, though. There was Ben Ortega, my oldest friend, my business partner, my other half. Ben wasn't a founder. He was a witness who never left. When I was grinding, he was organizing my calendar. When I had $20, he was driving me to property auctions in his mother's car. He was there through every all-nighter, every acquisition, every late-night panic attack over interest rates or lawsuits or regulatory shifts. And for all of that, I trusted him like I trusted gravity. Until last month. It was a Friday. Late. The kind of New York night that feels colder than it is. Ben showed up at my penthouse unannounced. He was pale, the kind of pale that has nothing to do with illness and everything to do with panic. "We have a problem," he said, before the door even closed. I offered him bourbon. He declined. That should have been my first sign. "The FBI's been poking around," he muttered. "Financial Crimes Unit. Tracing transfers tied to the Lucent deal last year." I blinked. Lucent was clean. Ben hesitated. "It was supposed to be." That's when my stomach twisted. "What did you do?" "It's not what you think," he said, too fast. "Look, we had a window. Capital gains laws were shifting. I ran some capital through a cleaner structure in the Caymans. It was temporary. The margins were perfect." "You laundered money," I said. Not a question. A declaration. He didn't answer. Just stared at the glass I hadn't poured for him. "I can fix it," he said. "I just need you to sign the compliance affidavits. Say you reviewed the structure. It'll hold. I promise." I stood there, feeling my lungs tighten. "I'm not signing anything. This isn't a game, Ben." "It wasn't laundering," he insisted. "It was optimization. The kind of thing every firm does. Except now it's a federal case." He didn't deny that either. I walked away. Stared out over the city I'd spent 2 decades climbing. "Do what you have to," I told him, without turning around. "Just keep me out of it." He left without another word. That night, I slept in a chair. I didn't close my eyes. I didn't need to. I'd already seen everything that was about to happen. 3 days later, I got the call. A soft voice. Male. Midwestern accent, trying to sound casual. "Mr. Marin, this is Agent Caro from the Bureau. Wondering if we might ask you a few questions regarding some filings from your Cayman entities." I didn't respond. I hung up. Within an hour, my legal team was swarming. By noon, the subpoena hit. Federal wire fraud. International money movement. Tax evasion. All tied to Marin Group Holdings. All built from Ben's decisions. But the documents? They had my signature. Forged. Impeccably. He'd known I wouldn't sign. So he hadn't asked. He just moved forward. And left my name behind like a used napkin. The walls closed quickly. Clients pulled back. Partners paused payments. A scheduled expansion deal in Hong Kong evaporated overnight. News leaked to the trades, Marin Empire facing federal scrutiny. My board went silent. My PR firm stopped replying. My chief of staff took personal leave. Ben? Vanished. Phones off. Accounts frozen. No trace. They all thought I was the architect of the rot. But I wasn't. I was just the one who trusted the wrong man with my signature. I could have stayed. Fought. Tried to explain. But I knew how these cases worked. The system didn't reward innocence, it punished silence. So I left. Not forever. Just long enough to watch what they'd all do when I was gone. I took what mattered. A go bag with $4.3 million in bearer bonds, some old IDs from a past life I'd never spoken about, and the one drive that Ben didn't know existed, the one that held everything. Every login. every wire transfer, every shadow LLC he ever registered in my name. Now I sit in a rented apartment above a closed bookstore in northern Spain. No cameras, no questions. And for the first time in 25 years, I'm not building anything. I'm watching, waiting, because this isn't over. Ben didn't just betray me. He betrayed the only thing I ever believed in, the sanctity of the work. And I'm going to repay him for that. Not with rage, not with bullets, but with collapse. His, mine, ours. I'm going to burn the entire empire to the ground, brick by brick. And when there's nothing left to steal or sell, then I'll introduce myself to him again. In the first 2 weeks off the grid, I allowed myself exactly one rule. Don't chase, observe. I didn't run. I disappeared with intent. No calls, no email. I became a rumor inside my own legacy, and that silence worked better than any alibi. In the media, I was painted as the enigmatic founder who may or may not have orchestrated his own downfall. That suited me. Let them fill in the blanks. Meanwhile, I began combing through every piece of data I had copied off our private server the month before everything collapsed, something I did out of habit, not paranoia. Ben always joked that I backed up our systems like a prepper stockpiles water. But it wasn't a joke. I knew something would go wrong eventually. I just never thought it would be him. What I found wasn't just betrayal, it was arrogance. Ben hadn't even tried to cover his tracks. Dozens of internal memos, compliance documents, legal correspondence, it was all there. Shell companies linked to Marin Group assets through offshore accounts. Leasing contracts with ghost operators. Accounting entries routed through marketing budgets. Even falsified tax statements submitted under our entity in Ireland. It was sloppier than I expected, but that's the problem with men like Ben. When they think no one is watching, they stop hiding. I wasn't going to take this to the authorities, not yet. The FBI wanted someone to blame, not the truth. And I'd already seen how fast they settled for the simplest story. No, I was going to take everything apart from the inside, like pulling stitches from a suit while the man still wears it. First, I went after the brand itself. Marin Group had always prided itself on its exclusivity through discretion, which ironically made it vulnerable to exactly the kind of doubt I needed. I contacted one of our high-profile corporate clients, an oil conglomerate executive I once helped out of a quiet scandal, and leaked a few concerns about recent irregularities in security audits. Nothing official, just enough to make their internal team initiate a review. Within days, their block booking across 12 Marin properties was put on hold. Then canceled. Quietly. That one client made up 8% of our total Q2 revenue. I knew every number. I had built them myself. Next, I created a fake whistleblower email account and sent a single encrypted message to our largest holding partner in Dubai. I referenced potential AML exposure in connection with a construction fund Ben had approved. I attached nothing. Didn't need to. The very phrase anti-money laundering triggers 6 automatic flags across any multinational firm's compliance systems. Within a week, their legal team began requesting copies of contracts Ben had manipulated, and Marin's legal counsel had no idea how to respond, because I'd already removed those files from our shared server. Then came the suppliers. I reached out to 3 boutique service vendors in Singapore and offered a confidential buyout through a dummy firm. When they asked why, I hinted that Marin might not be able to honor its future purchase orders. By the time the news circulated to the larger distribution pipeline, Marin's reliability index on the B2B procurement networks dropped below 60%. That's the threshold where red flag reviews begin. Most of it was technical noise, but it caused delays, friction, doubt, and that's what I needed. I didn't want them dead. I wanted them bleeding from paper cuts, just enough to feel the cracks forming under the marble. I wasn't angry when I did these things. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt cold, mechanical, focused. The way I used to feel when I'd stay up all night tweaking room occupancy algorithms before a fiscal review. Revenge isn't always about rage. Sometimes it's just the desire to correct a false equation. Ben had rewritten the narrative, tried to insert me into a formula I never approved. My job now was to rebalance it. Every move I made pulled a thread he thought no one would notice. But I noticed everything. I had always noticed. While this unfolded, I kept tabs on Ben's location through soft proxies. He wasn't hiding, he was posturing. Meetings in Argentina. A brief detour to Singapore. Then private security logs pinged an entry into a villa in Marbella, under a name I'd seen before, J.M. Wexler, one of the aliases he used during acquisitions. He was sitting on my legacy and pretending it was his. He'd taken over 3 of the holding companies, reorganized 2 more, and started pushing press about a new era for the Marin brand. It was so performative I almost laughed. Ben didn't want to disappear like me. He wanted to own the story. But he'd forgotten the first rule of perception. When your power comes from silence, attention is your enemy. I began assembling the final step quietly, a slow drip dossier built from the mirror drive. Not just one copy, but 10, each altered slightly, all pointing toward the same truth but with different emphasis. One would make him look like the mastermind. Another would imply coercion. A third would suggest a long history of shady behavior across multiple regions. I wanted regulators to fight over which version of him they believed, not whether he was guilty. And me? I didn't need to be part of that fight at all. Ben thought he'd exiled me. But I'd only stepped back far enough to watch the avalanche I'd engineered begin its descent. The 3rd month of my disappearance didn't feel like vanishing anymore. It felt like orbiting. Watching from above as something I'd built, brick by brick, was quietly hollowed out from the inside. Ben still hadn't realized it. That was the elegance of the plan. Nothing exploded, nothing bled, but everything was slowly, meticulously breaking. I didn't need to scream. I just needed to shift the weight slightly and let gravity do the work. The first visible collapse came via the Marin Luxury Residences initiative. That branch had always been my favorite, long-term suites for high-tier clients, designed with near-paranoid attention to comfort, security, and data privacy. 3 years of development, 12 properties, and contracts with half a dozen government-linked clients who paid not for rooms, but for silence. The entire operation was founded on digital discretion, and that's exactly where I attacked. I leaked a partial internal audit, just enough metadata to suggest our cloud security certificates hadn't been renewed on time. No breaches, no hard evidence, just the suggestion that a few door access logs weren't syncing properly. The story hit a minor cybersecurity blog at first, then Reddit, and within 4 days, Reuters picked it up. The Marin Group denied everything, issued a press release, and blamed it on unauthorized information manipulation. That phrase, so vague, so corporate, was enough to drive 3 major clients into suspending bookings. One even sent an emergency risk compliance team to evaluate digital containment. It didn't matter that nothing had been hacked. The illusion of vulnerability was enough. Marin Luxury was down 26% in booking volume in under 2 weeks. While that storm brewed, I released a second wave, this time through the supply chain. Using my dummy procurement firm, I initiated legal disputes with 2 of our legacy linen vendors over non-payment on fabricated invoices. The court notices were real. The claims were not. Marin Group's operations team couldn't locate the originating documents. Because they didn't exist, only enough trails to trigger audits. That's all I wanted. Friction, misunderstanding, time lost to confusion. With operations slowed, fulfillment paused, and partners angry, the executive team began showing cracks. I knew the names. I saw the HR logs. One resignation, then another. Quiet exits. No headlines. The kind of unraveling you only notice once the sweater's already gone. And Ben? He was finally sweating. I tracked him to a media dinner in Barcelona. A Marin strategic relaunch event at a private hotel rooftop. Footage surfaced 2 days later, him in a fitted jacket, laughing, posing, clinking glasses with a European influencer who couldn't pronounce his name correctly. But his smile didn't reach his eyes. He looked thinner. And beneath the sharp tailoring and bravado, I saw it. He was alone. He'd gotten everything he thought he wanted. The company, the spotlight, the control. But none of it worked without me. I had built the spine, the vision, the systems. And now, in my absence, those same systems were turning inward, digesting themselves. He issued an internal memo the following week titled, Refocusing Our Core. In it, he claimed that Marin would shed distractions and return to operational excellence. He meant cutbacks, staff slashes, canceled projects. He'd begun liquidating parts of the empire just to slow the bleeding. He didn't know where the holes were, and I made sure he never would. Meanwhile, I initiated contact with a low-profile investigations firm in Geneva. Not flashy. No online footprint.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing experience, but we really need your support, namely a subscription to the channel, which can make it possible to hire a professional voice actor and make the best content for you.
Old-school tradecraft. I wired a retainer through 3 shelf firms and gave them a single instruction. Find out who Ben was talking to behind closed doors. What properties he was trying to offload. Where the money was being parked. It took 3 days to uncover 2 offshore trusts newly established in the Seychelles, registered under names that meant nothing to anyone, except me. They were names we'd once joked about using for fake acquisitions way back when we were nobody. He'd recycled our old jokes into his real strategy. That told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't improvising anymore. He was copying the last plan that worked, because he had nothing of his own left. That was the turning point. Not the money, not the decline, but the fact that he had stopped innovating. That was when I knew the end was near. He would try to sell his way out, use legacy properties as firewood, package the bleeding empire for some overseas buyer looking for distressed luxury. That was the final play. So I made my next move. I took out a silent option on one of Marin's foundational lenders, a private capital group in Zurich that had funded our initial European expansion a decade ago. Through a proxy, I bought a minority stake. Not enough to trigger notice. Just enough to attend the next quarterly review meeting and to quietly introduce data showing Marin Group's decreasing asset reliability and pending legal liabilities. The result was immediate. Credit conditions tightened. An expected loan renewal was delayed. That alone sent Marin's internal financial model into panic mode. I didn't even have to pull the trigger. I just removed the safety. Ben released a statement blaming market instability, but the press wasn't buying it anymore. Too many small fires. Too many unknowns. What once looked like innovation now looked like improvisation. What once looked like control now looked like desperation. I sat in my apartment in Spain and watched every press release, every new memo, every clipped interview. I knew his face better than anyone, and I could see it now, the slow realization, the quiet fear. Something was coming, and he couldn't name it. He wasn't paranoid yet, but he would be. Soon. By mid-June, the Marin Group was a shell with a good haircut. On the outside, it still had the suits, the logos, the glossy campaigns with orchestral music and drone shots of infinity pools. But inside, the systems were stalling. The accounts payable queue had tripled. Regional managers were filing restructuring memos to partners without telling corporate. Staff turnover at the flagship Zurich property hit 37%. That's not just a number. That's decay. You don't need explosions to destroy an empire. You just loosen one bolt at a time until it stops holding together. I watched all of it happen without lifting a finger, because I'd already lifted them months ago. Ben, for his part, was finally starting to crack. My investigators in Geneva sent me footage of him storming out of a meeting with some Middle Eastern investors, people he had promised a brand consolidation opportunity. Word was they backed out after one of my planted reports about Marin's deteriorating regulatory standing reached their legal team. He blamed internal leaks. Hired a cybersecurity firm. Fired 2 mid-level directors. None of it helped. Because what he didn't realize yet was that I wasn't inside the company anymore. I was under it. The next phase had to be psychological. Up to this point, everything I'd done looked like coincidence. Paper cuts. Market pressure. Unlucky timing. But I wanted more now. Not just collapse, I wanted recognition. I wanted him to start seeing shadows. So I gave him one. An email. No sender name. No traceable header. Just one sentence. The empire was never yours. I didn't expect a reply. That wasn't the point. The point was to pull the curtain back half an inch. Let the doubt creep in. Let him start counting enemies. Let him look over his shoulder during every board meeting, wondering who else knew what he'd done. According to my source inside his legal team, Ben responded by demanding internal audits. Dozens of them. Not just financial, but personnel, digital forensics, vendor histories. He even brought in a private security consultant to run background checks on senior staff. That was his mistake. When you start interrogating your own people without cause, they don't double down. They scatter. By the time the next financial quarter closed, Marin's legal exposure had doubled. Staff morale plummeted. The European compliance director resigned with a public LinkedIn post referencing irreconcilable management misalignment. That post made headlines. Investors noticed. One prominent holding company began quietly offloading Marin shares in its hotel REIT bundle. From the outside, it looked like bad press. From the inside, it looked like contagion. That's when I sent the second message. A gift. Encrypted. Hidden in a Dropbox folder I knew he still had access to, a leftover from our old pitch deck drafts. A document named Lisbon_evaluation_V2. Inside, 3 internal contracts Ben had forged. The real ones. Watermarked. Timestamped. With metadata proving they had been altered. Only one other person on Earth could have had copies of those. Me. No message. No signature. Just the facts. Ben didn't make a move for days. Then, suddenly, he called a press conference. Not to confess. Of course not. He spun it as a corporate transparency initiative. Said he would launch a full-scale internal review of Marin's growth strategy. He used words like legacy optimization and structural accountability. The press swallowed it, mostly. But I saw the tremor in his fingers when he gripped the podium. And I recognized the pause, half a second too long, after someone asked if David Marin would be involved in any way. He said, no comment. That's when I knew I had him. He didn't know how much I had, but he knew I had enough. I let a week pass. Then I began contacting old allies. Not friends. I didn't have those anymore. But business partners, developers, architects. The people who'd built this thing with me in the early years, before Ben became a shadow behind the scenes. Some of them had been pushed out when he took over. Some were still working on second-rate projects under his name. To each one, I offered a deal. Cash, equity, freedom. If they'd walk away from Marin now, I'd give them the seed capital to start their own. A dozen accepted in the first week. One of them leaked our meeting to the press. The headline read, Marin Group Exodus Continues as Founding Visionaries Resurface. Ben didn't make a statement this time. He flew to the States. I know because I tracked his charter manifest. A visit to Washington, D.C., most likely a legal scramble to buffer himself. Maybe a deal. Maybe a firewall. It didn't matter. He was trying to save a ship I'd already gutted below the waterline. Meanwhile, I finalized the endgame. I created a holding company under a completely new name, one with no trace to me, not even conceptually. I purchased the debt Marin owed on its two most lucrative, but leveraged properties, the Osaka Tower and the Vancouver Marina Resort. Bought it through two other firms at a discount, while Ben was too busy running audits and defending PR storms. Then I called in the loans. Forced default. The properties were seized. The revenue collapsed. That was 21% of Marin's global income. Gone. Not stolen. Not sabotaged. Just called due. You can't cheat leverage. You can only delay it. Ben never saw it coming. Because he was too busy looking behind him and not below. I flew back to the U.S. under a name that didn't belong to me. Not that anyone cared. Ben had drawn all the attention. The press was tearing into his strategy, the shareholders were demanding audits, and two regulatory agencies were preparing investigations into Marin's international tax disclosures. It was all public now. But the damage had already been done long before the headlines ever hit. I didn't come back to gloat. I didn't come back to take anything. I came back to finish it. My last move was personal. Not digital. Not legal. Just a meeting. I sent the invite through his attorney. No message. No demand. Just a time and place. A diner in upstate New York, 40 miles from where we bought our first property together in 2008. A little coffee shop that hadn't changed in 15 years. I knew he'd show up. Because by now, Ben had nothing left but questions. And I was the only one with answers. He walked in looking 10 years older. No tie. Collar loose. Eyes sharp, but sunken. When he saw me in the corner booth, he stopped for just half a second, long enough to register that I was real. He didn't sit immediately. He just stared at me. You, he said finally. I nodded. Me. You ruined me. No, I replied. You did that the moment you signed my name without asking. He slid into the booth. No menus. No orders. Just silence between two men who once built an empire and now sat in the wreckage. I thought we were a team, he said after a moment. I didn't laugh. I didn't raise my voice. You thought I'd cover for you. That I'd look the other way. That's not a team. That's a scapegoat. He looked away. Out the window. At a world that no longer bent for him. I didn't know how to stop it, he admitted. It just kept growing. The money. The leverage. The deals. I thought if I paused, everything would fall. It did, I said. But not because you paused. Because you lied. He looked back at me, and this time there was something close to hatred behind his eyes. But he didn't have the strength to show it. Why not just take it back? He asked. You could have come back. Reclaimed it. Fixed it. Everyone would have backed you. Because I didn't want it anymore, I said simply. Not after what it became. That's easy for you to say, he snapped. You had cash. You had an exit plan. I was left holding the weight. You were holding ashes, I replied. You just didn't know it yet. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then he asked the question he'd been holding since he sat down. How long have you been doing this? Since the night you forged my signature. His jaw tightened. All of it, He asked. Every audit, every leak, every default, every name on your investor blacklist. That was me. He swallowed hard. And the email? I nodded. He let out something between a breath and a laugh. It had no humor in it. You win. This wasn't a game. He looked me in the eyes for the first time without posturing. What do you want? That was the question that broke him, because he already knew the answer. Nothing, I said. I already took everything I needed. He didn't argue, didn't offer a counter, because we both knew what that meant. The Marin Group was dead. Its name would linger in lawsuits and financial textbooks, but the soul was gone. There would be no revival, no redemption arc, no buyout from an overseas fund looking to salvage a brand. Ben had tried that already, and I'd made sure every door he knocked on had been quietly shut before he got there. He leaned back in the booth like the gravity in his spine had finally won. You should have killed me, he muttered. I stood, buttoned my coat. You're not worth the prison time. I left him there, in that booth, surrounded by memories he couldn't monetize. When I stepped outside, the air was clean, cold, familiar. There were no reporters, no headlines, no applause, just silence. And for the first time in decades, I felt peace. Because I'd done what no acquisition, no quarterly earnings call, no billion-dollar valuation had ever given me. I corrected the lie. Ben had tried to rewrite history. I made sure history remembered it properly. 2 months passed after that diner meeting. Ben disappeared. Again. Not into exile this time, into silence. I heard he sold his penthouse to cover legal bills, liquidated the last of his holdings, and filed a motion to dissolve what was left of the Marin Group. No press release. No farewell tour. Just paperwork and dust. A quiet deletion. Nobody asked me to return. And I didn't offer. There was nothing to return to. The hotels? Bought and renamed. The board? Dissolved or absorbed. The brand? Tainted beyond repair. But oddly, I felt no grief. I didn't want it anymore. Because in the end, the empire I built was never the reward. It was the disguise. It had always been about motion, achievement, the pursuit of something large enough to silence the noise in my own head. And when that pursuit ended, so did the illusion of control. I bought a cabin in Vermont. Not remote, not hidden, just quiet. A place where people read the paper and drink coffee without talking about quarterly earnings or funding rounds. My closest neighbor is a woman in her 60s who runs a secondhand bookstore. She thinks I write essays for a living. I don't correct her. Some days, I drive into town and sit at the bakery for an hour, just to hear what small problems sound like again. They used to feel insignificant. Now they sound like life. Real life. Life with texture. With humanity. Ben never apologized again. Not that I expected him to. Some people aren't sorry. They're just empty. And when they finally stop running, there's nothing inside them but the echo of their own ambition. He wasn't a villain. He was just a man who believed the lie too long, that success is about who wins. But winning isn't the same as matching. The Marin Group doesn't exist anymore. But the people I helped build it with? They're still out there. Starting new things. Smaller, quieter, cleaner. Some even send me updates. One of them opened a sustainable lodge in Norway. Another bought back her family's in Vermont. I helped her refinance it anonymously. I'm not rebuilding. I'm not investing. I'm just watching. I learned something in the unraveling. Not all foundations crack because of storms. Some collapse because they were built on friendship misunderstood as loyalty, on the belief that shared history means shared ethics. That was my mistake. I thought the man who stood beside me would always share the values that built the thing. But he didn't care about the work. He cared about the shine, the recognition, the crown. And the irony is, the moment he got it, it turned to ash in his hands. I used to believe money was the measure, that numbers defined value, and work proved character. But money only amplifies who someone already is. It doesn't transform them. Give a thief a fortune and he'll steal bigger. Give a coward power and he'll hide behind louder orders. Give a liar a microphone and he'll build a brand. Now I believe in smaller things. In people who say less and do more. In legacies that don't need headlines to matter. In loyalty that doesn't require profit. And in silence, not as an absence, but as a kind of truth. The kind you don't broadcast, because the ones who understand it never needed the explanation. I never rebuilt the Marin Group, but I never had to, because I finally understood the one thing I spent my whole life ignoring. You don't need to own the world to win. You just need to live in it with your soul intact.
What do you think of the story? Write in the comments.